All right, go. Hey everyone, thanks for coming out tonight. Woo, let me get some noise out here, some liveliness. Let's go. It's Wednesday, baby. All right, this is Internet Culture Field Notes. The idea behind this was pretty simple. It felt like there were a lot of conversations happening around the internet. Platforms, creators, incentives, AI, audiences, all of it. But a lot of those conversations started feeling overly polished, overly theoretical, or disconnected from the people actually living inside these systems every day. So, this is meant to be a little different. This isn't a panel, okay? It's more of a working session, a live conversation between people actively building, publishing, experimenting, surviving, and trying to make sense of the current stack in real time. The goal tonight isn't consensus. Honestly, if everyone agrees the whole time, we probably failed a little bit. The interesting parts are usually the contradictions, the tensions, the things that don't fully resolve cleanly. So, I'd encourage everyone up here to interrupt each other, push back, respond naturally, and keep it conversational. Yeah? Really quick. Thank you to Automatic for hosting us and supporting the event. Let's hear it for them. And also Friends with Benefits, FWB. Let's hear it for them as well, people. We really appreciate them opening up the space for this. And thank you all for being here.
Also, let's thank Hire.zip.
Oh, let's thank Hire.zip, everybody. Come on, give me some skin. Slides, let's get on that. Yeah, all right. And I'm going to hand it over to Jose to guide us into the conversation.
All right. This works. Let's do this. I'm going to start off by asking you folks to actually go ahead and introduce yourself so people know who the hell they're about to listen to. Start with you, John. Absolutely not. I don't want to start with myself. I'll start with you.
Okay, cool. My name's Trevor Banta. People know me as the Error Gardener. I call myself a conceptual florist and skateboarder, but really I'm just kind of a modern artist that just has to do all the things in order to survive in this landscape. So I play music, I arrange flowers, I skateboard, obviously. I'm a photographer. I have a background in media production. So yeah, and then obviously I've traded crypto with a bunch of random strangers on the internet, and so that got me this far. I think that's a good little concise bit, so let's pass it on to you.
I miss you being my exit liquidity.
I probably was.
My name's Soren. I don't do as much as Trevor here, but I run a company called Titles. We help artists create, share, and monetize their own custom AI models. So we build creative tools, we make them fun, accessible, powerful to use, and then we build a system underneath that does attribution and payments for those artists. So whenever those models are used, they make cash. Yeah, I live in New York City, born and raised Portland, Oregon. Yeah, that's where I'll stop there.
Cool. My name's Jose. I am your humble moderator, technically speaking. I am the co-founder and CEO of a company called Seed Infrastructure Company. We're building a platform called Mesh that you can think of as open infrastructure for anyone who makes money from bringing people together in person. And I think where I want to kick things off is thank you for bringing up crypto and exit liquidity. Apologies to anyone in the audience who doesn't want to hear about blockchain, but you're going to have to, unfortunately, for a brief period of time. I'm curious how both of you found yourselves even caring about crypto as a technology, and whether or not it was from a financial standpoint, whether it was sort of the decentralization standpoint, and then how do you feel about the state of the technology and the scene around it today? Maybe I'll start with you, Soren, since you're actively still building this space.
Yeah, I think my first answer is I'm like annoyingly contrarian, and I just feel like when you know, blockchain just feels like that, and so there's like that personal problem. But you know, I got introduced to a blockchain through my buddy Marcus Estes in like 2015, 2016, and he was trying to build a tool for raising money for small businesses using ERC20s back then. and I was telling him about a project I was working on to do a photo and video marketplace, and he was like, you know, you could put pictures on it. And I was like, okay. And that was like not really possible at that time, but he posed the idea. And I think that idea has kind of stuck in my head ever since then. And I don't know, it's, you know, step by step, you meet people that were like at consensus at the time, and they were all over the planet, and that brought people into the kind of the fold of that. And I don't know, it's just stuck in my head ever since. So I don't know, it's like a mind virus, I think, at the end of the day. But I think it's a really important counterweight in the world today, for sure, in terms of using that technology in an interesting way. And I think, you know, people should double down now than ever to try and use it. Yeah.
Theoretically, really quickly, before Trevor goes, how much money do you think you made off of counter trading against him?
Probably like 3 months rent. Yeah. Yeah, not too bad.
Trevor, how does that make you feel?
Well, I applaud your wins. You know, I'm not gonna tear you down for that, but the secret about kind of my background is I'm actually a pretty successful trader. I have had to be in order to survive in this landscape. I got my invite to like the world of crypto, I think from Paul Tao. He invited me to mint a piece to that very first Zora contract. And I remember like Moore Dillon sent me, you know, some ETH so that I could pay the gas fees, and I used that. I use these like flower photos that are similar to the ones that you're seeing back here, to kind of just start to participate in that space. I believe in like crypto as like the archive, right? Like the universal archive on the world computer, the proof of existence, the proof that you did something. If I were to die tomorrow, that work still lives somewhere. It's not going to be lost on a hard drive. It's not going to be lost in just a computer that nobody's going to know the password to. And so that to me was important. And then it also represented kind of the first time the underdog could make money and compete with people who were backed in a traditional like music world or art world. And so for me, it just leveled the playing ground. And from there, you know, I remember minting my first flower photo to that original contract. It cost $120 in transaction fees to put it up there, but I felt kind of like proud of myself for like learning something that was like technologically over my head, but at the same time, 3 days later, it sold for 0.1 ETH, and that was like more money I'd ever made in one single instance being validated as an artist. And so I was kind of hooked from that point on, and it was things like that, those early years of FWB, that kind of helped cultivate that understanding of what I was doing on chain, why it was important, and why it still matters.
I have a follow-up question, which is like, that was then, what about all of this is different to you today in terms of what it means to you?
The archive and the proof of existence stuff and all of that hasn't changed for me. What changed around me was the landscape of what was fashionable in the moment. And so a few years ago, a lot of people pivoted to L2 chains in order to like declutter the main net that we were all participating on. And that whole process was very messy. There was a lot of big money, like corporate money, that was kind of trying to change the narratives away from that universal archive and onto just like cheaper transactions, faster transactions. Like, who cares? Like, we didn't need speed. We needed validation and understanding that something would live forever. The whole like calling card for Ethereum is forever. Well, a lot of people's definitions of what forever was only a few months, or maybe a year, or maybe a year or two, and then you move on and go forth on to something else.
Yeah, I would add like the things I'm hearing from you, by the way, which is fun, is you talk about speed. I think like, you know, we live in New York, so it's obviously fast, but I think we're all trying to move a little slower, like every day. And then the other thing too is cost, right? It feels like everything's getting cheaper, flatter, all that type of stuff. And like the idea that like one of the first apps we built, someone spent like $800 in gas like one night, just like, and it was a mobile app, and they like woke up the next morning and they were like, what did I just do to my bank account? And I was like, our bad, but this is not even made that. And like gas was super high when they were using it, and like, but the friction and the reaction to that, right, of like spending the money to actually share something worthwhile, right, is, I think, again, in a counterweight to a lot of that. I think that stuff matters. So.
Well, and for me, it's like, I don't mind paying more money if it's guaranteed to be there all the time. Like, you're paying for that forever archive. Like, it shouldn't be this thing that we're so quick to just put garbage on. Like, it shouldn't be cheap. Like, the price was actually a barrier to entry that kept a lot of bad actors from actually participating in it. And then, they could go do the same things on Solana, which is really cheap. Now a lot of that traffic moved to Base, which is kind of funny because, Base happened as a counter effect to trying to make things cheaper and whatever, but we didn't really need it. But we were told we needed it. And it didn't really apply to most of the artists working.
Okay, so you're down for financial gatekeeping. I'm going to use that as a pivot to then introduce AI, because AI, in my mind and in my experience, is the exact opposite of what you're saying, right? It is an opportunity to, or an invitation to, in a lot of cases, move more quickly on purpose, right? You're taking what some people might call shortcuts. It is not guaranteed to give you the same result every single time, right? And so I'm curious about, for both of you, especially you, Soren, where you find the tension between those two things, how that maybe informs the work that you're doing, and whether or not there is value in the ability to iterate and explore more quickly before you perhaps commit something to an archive or like a repository that's meant to live forever.
I don't use AI for fiscal instances. Like those flowers you see back there, I made with AI, early models that were like pre-Midjourney and pre-Dolly and all that stuff. So it was still like, there was a lot of human intervention with, I used to call them like the recipe that you prompt in order to get a creative output. All that still comes from the human mind. It's you're prompting poetry essentially, but that poetry instead of words is an image. And so for me, AI was really important in the early years of my work, but I also understood it. It was important that I kind of use it early because there was only a short window of opportunity to actually benefit from it.
Did you know that at that moment in time?
That's just what it felt like. And it's kind of played out with a lot of the technological advances that are supposed to benefit artists in that way, to where, Zora started creator token stuff. There was a very small window where you were able to make money as an artist and that be viable. And I recognized that just based on other experiments that I've done within this space. And I was selling my creator token constantly because that's the only time I'm gonna make money. And I'm still paying rent. I'm still trying to survive. And this was a time when I was making art and not sure if I could eat the next day. I was essentially selling my creator coin for burrito money. And
it's a good exchange.
And it's a great exchange, but it's also kind of fucked because there's people all around me that are just gamifying that system and they're making thousands of dollars because they have the volume up front in order to benefit. They can afford to lose, and that kind of agency gave them an upper hand in winning.
Or in a lot of cases, they're not actually producing anything of value to exchange for the money that they're presumably spending on burritos as well, right? You're actually taking the time to make things you care about, you believe in, and hoping that someone else on the other side of that sees it as something we're paying for.
To the same point, all of the artists were constantly cell shamed for doing just that. But it's what is the play here? What are we supposed to do with this new technology? Are we supposed to tokenize everything and just assume that our popularity is going to create enough volume in order to thrive? No, that's ridiculous. Most people, there's a small fraction of our audience that exists within the crypto sphere that's actually participating. Most of the people are on Instagram, which doesn't have a fiscal center. It's all attention. And that attention is worth more than the little bits and pieces that most of us artists and musicians were able to extract from it, to put it that way.
I actually really quickly want to dig into this because there's an interesting thread here, which is how much of what you're saying is, for lack of a better word, the fault of the audience, right? How much of that would you be willing to ascribe to the fact that people for years haven't been exactly excited about or used to or motivated to actually like pay for the art they consume. Or if they are, they're doing it through subscription models. Like, are you willing to go there and say that it's on them, or are there other factors at play?
I think we've been conditioned to just expect art to be free. And that's kind of why I don't make music for streaming. I make music for art galleries. Like, you have to go to a place to actually experience the work I do. And then that, in turn, creates its own revenue streams that are seated in reality. Like, a lot of this, like, fictional creator tokens and content stuff, like, there was this expectation that you could win, but the examples were like Jesse at Base, who has 1,000 followers of all crypto people who can just throw $1,000 at, whatever he ate for breakfast. And that's just not viable for most artists. Most artists are like spending way too many hours, like stressing out over their output, and then they then take that work and participate in these worlds, and are met with, maybe $12.
This is also like all a relative problem because, when we think about AI and and blockchains overall, the problem that I see, right, is that like none of these are put in context and culture in the right way. And so when we suffer, or you suffer from the trading atmosphere of creator tokens, and then, you look at AI overall and you see the types of people that are using that as like their main daily driver tool, or like, let's say, image generation, right? It's the type of population that's adopted that first, and blockchains being, trading types of folks. And then on the other side, right, the AI it's kind of like the SF techie type, I think. And I think that the common through line between both of those is that everyone views both of those technologies as the ends, not the means. And so when you're talking about the floral projects you're working on, right, it's like, it feels like that you're using AI in relation to that as a tool to explore to get somewhere else, right?
But I also use it very practically. So
Yeah,
I just
absolutely.
built my entire tour itinerary for this book I'm shooting on skate parks and cemeteries called Skate or Die. It's replacing the tour manager for me. I can put all my tickets, all my Airbnb information, all the stuff that I need to travel into like a Claude model, and have that organize my life, and just ask it, hey Claude, like, what time do I have to be at the airport in Rome? Like, are the lines going to be tricky? Like, what are the things I need to know about these things? So I'm very practically using AI in terms of empowering my life, because I can't afford a tour manager. I can't afford the support that most people are privy to in order to like excel their careers. So I'm using AI to that benefit. I think of the farmers that are using AI to program like weed regulation. They can use these models to actually create robots that help their plight, and kind of like in place of them not being able to afford to hire other people, other farmhands, and things like that.
Well, even more simply, I don't know why this is in my brain, but John Deere tractors have like a DRM system that allows John Deere to shut down your tractor if you haven't paid for upgrades to it. And so people are actually using AI to hack the DRM on the $15,000 to $20,000 piece of equipment that they paid for, that they expected to be able to use. I think that like the
Is that what's happening to my tractor? That's weird.
You haven't paid.
Yeah, I'm trying to make freaking harvest my
Let me get your OpenFly agent to like, hack into it.
Open source.
Get those
open
yields
source.
on,
Not here.
It's all farming all the way down.
And in some cases, liberal farming.
Soren, can you maybe tell us a little more about the state of titles as a platform today, and how you're trying to address some of the problems around like commerce, context, and creativity, and wrapping that in a package people can understand and use?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about like media environment in terms of what people value, like, and enjoy kind of consuming. And it felt like to me it was pretty obvious looking at AI and a lot of the media that you see on TikTok being like, you'll see a song posted there, and how I made the song does better than the video, does better than the song itself. And then you look at like, an amazing video made with AI that's up on Twitter, and the first 7 comments, right, are, how did you make this? What's your workflow, right? And there's so much kind of practicality in a lot of that, right? But it's also kind of really interesting to see kind of this eagerness of what's the instruction manual. And I think a lot about what that is people trying to understand both the context behind that, but also what is the like technique that's native to the media that you really love, right? And so when it comes to titles, one of the things that we're doing is, every like generation using our tool, it's both using a custom AI model that's trained by an artist with the work that they trained on, right, and provide us to help do so. But with that, right, when people use those, it's spitting out the prompt parameters and stores that all in this like protocol, this system that creates this giant memory layer for what are people doing and how are they doing that. And I think that the how-to playbook is really, really important in this era. And like, we're just trying to make better and better, more polished models, but like people are really yearning for like accessibility about how the native techniques that people are actually using to do this stuff. And I think once you establish that, and the only way we can get there is, through ownership. We give artists ownership of their models, and we do attribution in a way that no other company does, which then creates this kind of, you would say like most other AI companies would be like, we're a black box, you don't know how this model works, right? You use it, and you get this practical use case out of it. I love that, right? But we've kind of gone the other way and trying to lean into things that they wouldn't do. And by nature of doing that, exposes kind of all these really interesting emergent benefits around like how are, one artist model getting collaborated with another. And like those are really interesting things that start to happen there, just by taking, I wouldn't say the high road, but kind of leaning into, different aspects that I think people are, kind of yearning for, which is ownership, accessibility, participation. And we kind of just like landed and discovered some of this stuff, right? By saying, what if instead of that, you did that, right? And having faith in that process. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
What percentage of the artists that are using your platform are actually like generating the works that like create the ability for them to like subsist in life? And how much of that is just kind of them kind of making the cheaper version of themselves that they can just license to commercial or to these use cases that don't need 100% of their output, but like can like feel like it. I think about the band Yacht and how they used to make music. They used to like get licensing requests for a lot of their music, but because they were on major labels, the license was generally expensive. So they would actually make a song that sounded like themselves, but under a different name in order to license it for cheaper. Like how much of that is at play here versus like people fully replacing their art practice with your platform?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that anyone is fully, all the artists we work with are like highly conceptual. So we just got back from an event in SF with a group called Gray Area up there in the Mission District. And we had 5 different artists show up, all using titles in the model that they have in very conceptual ways. The one I found kind of the most interesting and funny was Arvita Bystrom. She trained a model on all of her like 2010 camera phone, like I like saying camera phone pictures, and she's created this like digital twin on Instagram now. And it's like totally separate from her practice, right? But she was like, hey, I can now like crowdsource imagery from other people using my model, right? It generates pictures of her, from that era, right? And so it's like, there's just a myriad of like weird ways that people are using these things that are, and this is kind of my broader statement about like, it was never about aesthetic, right? Like that's a contributing factor to an environment, right? But the concept, the story you want to tell, that's all the artists that we work with, right? They're interested in those stories, right? And so
how much of this is based on longevity versus like just kind of experimenting in the moment?
Well, I think you'd have to ask like,
for you, like what does that represent? Like is Titles like kind of a platform you see subsisting for years and years and years and years, or is it just meeting people in a moment?
I think the moment is always changing and evolving, right? And so we meet artists where they're at, and at a given point in time, I think, we look at AI and how it's evolved, all the jargon that's used now and where we're at and like what's possible, right? And it's just always changing and evolving. And so we, I think are always interested in meeting that moment, whether it be 26 or 27 or 28, right? I don't know. I think we're in this the long game and trying to apply attributes that I think artists really care about, which is a sense of accreditation, ownership, payments, those things that we're all talking about. Yeah, I think like the question I think you're asking is like, is AI going anywhere? And like,
I think the question is more, is this application of AI?
Yeah, and I think another way to ask it is also, given what you know today about how artists are engaging with titles, given your perspective on where you expect AI to get to,
Yeah.
what does the title's like end game look like? Is it a ton of like value unlocked for the creators that are building models? Is it 10x that many people who maybe aren't necessarily professional artists using the models that have been trained to just like dick around and do interesting things? Like what's the win that you are most obsessed with today? It may not be what you actually want a year from now, and I'm curious what right now your view of the future looks like.
well, I think, I mean, since we just relaunched all these tools like a month ago. And we now have a list of probably, I don't know, 15 artists that are all asking, hey, you put this model in this tool, it's a creative tool that you can do stuff with, right? But can I use this in more extensive ways using your infrastructure? Can I vibe code up my own creative tool, my own like services, my own use of these models? And so like the way that we view titles as like a long-term thing is like, if Adobe is the like cathedral, this like refined, very tight experience for using creative tools that is very closed. This is this like weird, bizarre version, which is that like people can come in, issue stuff out, reuse stuff, like kind of imagine use cases out of that. And we're kind of entering the splinterverse of like these tools and use cases, right? That I think every single artist we talk to is like, hey, I'm making my own tools now, right? But they want the same infrastructure and the same capabilities. They want payments. They want to issue out those things with those same virtues and attributes around ownership, payments, those things like that. So I think like titles is part creative tool, but also part infrastructure that like provides services that like allow you to extend in that conceptual space in a lot of different ways. And I can't really enumerate all of the different ways that people are thinking about that, but yeah, you'll see a lot of that from us soon.
Trevor, you'll bet you don't buy parts of that.
I don't know. I don't know how it scales and why it would be worth spending more time building more models when I'm still making the art I'm making. Like how much of it is like, again, that question of how much of it is just meeting a moment and experimenting and making some money and then moving on and like going back to the thing that you were versed in. Versus like, oh, I'm going all in on AI. Like, this is my new practice. This is every output is going to be this. Like, it doesn't seem viable.
Well, I think a lot of your
Can I
comments.
posit something?
Yeah.
Let's do that, Mike.
Do
it for the
all sorts of artists, change direction all the time. They experiment. They're Lou Reed, and they do a fucking angry noise album.
That shit is so good though.
Yeah, but I'm saying, why can't it be both?
I think it can be both. But to the same point, just speaking from my own personal experience, I don't make AI flowers anymore. I'm a florist and I use flowers as my subject matter in whatever medium that is.
Yeah.
I'll probably get into pottery at some time and make some fucked up like clay stuff or whatever. I'll probably end up painting when I'm 50. But the subject matter is what matters to me. It's not the tools I'm using or the medium.
Well, this is again the point I'm making, which is that AI is not the ends. And so when you think about different projects and practices you're using, there may be a question in your thought process, which is, how can I apply AI to this? And often we like people come to us for asking that question and some form of answer. It is not the AI is the only solution we have for this thing that I want to do the story. Like we find that time and time again, right? So it's like not really this polar thing that you're describing.
I think to also throw out some context too and zoom back out, like this is funny. I tweeted about this in a half joking way, but one of the questions I tweeted in preparation for this was like, does an artist thinking about money like make them lose the mandate of heaven? And I think about that in relation to like the types of things people would say about a Warhol or a Coombs, where it's very obvious that like commerciality and selling shit was core to like their practice. I think for the entirety of modern art, like this question has been something that no one has a clear answer to. It sounds like for you, like it is very much more about making things for the sake of making them, being drawn by a subject matter that excites you and following that. And like you seem very clear about your desire to and ability to at times like make that work for you from a financial standpoint, economic standpoint, but it doesn't seem like you're sitting there obsessing over like how can I sell the most shit to get the steak instead of the burrito.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'd like to add guac every now and then.
we have artists that come to us and say, hey, can I put my model on titles but price it on $1,000 every image generated? Or can I train a model that is extremely reductive in terms of what's possible to do with it? Right. So there's...
Are those things allowed?
Yeah, technically, yeah. We have to build a lot of the stuff that like can do that. I mean, in terms of the training the models, there are some very specific versions right on our tool that are like in a utilitarian or practical sense not very useful, right? But that's what we're interested in doing, right? Is providing services that let people do that because it's about intent, right? So yeah, I was talking with someone about that today about like commerciality and it relates to like making stuff, right? And I think if you like mid-curve it, you end up in a weird place, right? Like I think you should be like super commercial or like try and lean in on the other side, right? And I think a lot about like people that get commissioned to do different work, right? And it's like even the entry point, the idea that someone comes to you saying, I want a song that sounds kind of like that, right? And you're like, okay, right? Whereas like, or were you in your bedroom, on FL Studio making stuff and there was no one calling you, right? And like, both can lead to good stuff, right? But I just think it's like different entry points into when you start making stuff.
Would you agree with that take, Trevor?
What was the take specifically?
I don't know if there's a take other than when people have a commercial start to things, right? There's just a different intent when you start things, and that leads to different requests, different demands, different output at the end of the day, whether you...
I think it becomes a watered down version of like what you're meant to be making.
Yeah, or it could be the most successful thing you've ever made.
And that's
no
fine,
idea why.
but money is like temporary. Like it comes and goes, And so
Yeah.
how, like when you look back at your body of work, like how much of it do you want to be meaningful to you versus like, there is no version of selling out in 2026. It doesn't exist anymore. But there is a soul to the work you do and a feeling as an artist that when you do those things, it doesn't feel good sometimes. And that can affect a lot of things just within your life, your relationships, your ability to actually capture the momentum that's going to keep you going the direction you want. And I think in those terms, yeah, it doesn't feel right to me.
What's the closest you ever came to selling out?
I don't know that I can answer that. Like not being like pretentious or whatever, but it just
I think we should
I've
figure this out.
never made enough money to even have that be a question.
Do you think raising money from venture capitalists is selling out?
I think that there's just something really unique about that process. It is neither selling out nor, I don't know, it's like a secret third thing in my mind. And especially as someone who's like done it a couple times and had really kind of interesting journeys each time, because there's one way to frame it as like, I need this capital in order to produce this result or this thing that I'm trying to bring into the world. And if you can be really selective about that, like you can achieve those goals, bring something to bear that people are excited by, and if someone happened to give you some money at the very beginning of that to make that happen, you're probably all right. Then there's scenarios, of course, where like they want to get really involved and they change the direction of what you're trying to build and they have like undue influence. I find it sort of this weird slippery thing that the second you try to define it, it's it's different for every founder, it's different for every team. I think that the best case scenario is one in which you get the right people to make the right kinds of bets on you that allow you to kind of just create what you want to create. That's no different to me than like, I don't know, an artist at some point having to decide like, I need to unload 10 new things this week or else, not to use the same location again, I'm not going to be able to afford burritos.
Burritos for all.
Burritos for all. One thing that we haven't talked about is the nature of like audiences and like consumers on the other side of this, right? So I'm curious about, Trevor, like when you're putting stuff out, are you talking to like a dedicated audience of like Trevor Banta, Eric Gardner fans? Do you care about like breaking out of that? How does the sort of relationship psychologically with people actually paying attention to what you're doing influence like your work or your day-to-day kind of like promotion of that work?
So it kind of just depends on the medium I'm working in. So I'm a skateboarder, I'm a florist, I'm a musician. Those are three kind of separate worlds that sometimes do intersect. And part of my practice is trying to force them to intersect more often. So I actually do this project called Flowers for Memories, where I trade people flower bouquets based on the memory that they share with me. But I do that at the skate park. And so it kind of forces people to kind of like see the juxtaposition and become curious. And when you become curious about something, an interesting thing happens where, you know, you'll get people that don't normally hang out together, and then they find common ground in their own ways. And so it could end up not being anything related to flowers or skateboarding. A perfect example is last year, I hosted a skate jam at McCarran Park, the McCarran Skate Park, and brought a bunch of flowers and just set up on a picnic bench there. And you had like tons of old ladies like come by just because they see the tulips and they're like, oh my God, they're so beautiful. Like, what is this? And then like on the other side of the table, the whole hire crew is just like crushing beers and just like, you know, getting ready to go skate and all this stuff, like shooting with the VX. And so you had this like really interesting juxtaposition of the people of New York just hanging out. And for me, that's like an entirely new art practice in and of itself. It's just the ability to get interesting people together in a room by any means possible. And so the end product becomes something entirely different than what it was supposed to be. And so I don't know, it really just depends on the thing I'm doing. Like the Skate Park Cemeteries book, most people love it just because it sounds ridiculous. But really, when you think about it, skate or die is a thing we've heard since the 80s. And that's like a common phrase that even if you're not a hardcore skateboarder, you can understand, appreciate, and think it's like a little cheeky. And so then that becomes fun, and maybe they'll end up buying a book when it's done. And so I think it's more important that I try and bridge all these worlds that I do, but it's never the intention, right? Or it's never like the expectation. It's just kind of like a means to try something new, try something different, and see what happens as a result.
I'm thinking about a grandma with a tulip in her hand doing a tray flip, and just like how sick that would be.
That would be super sick. But you know, we joke about this, but there was an older woman who walked by the skate park, and she would not have walked through the skate park because of how intense skateboarding is. But then she kind of looked and was a little too shy to participate. So I ran after her with a bunch of tulips and just said, hey, you forgot this. And then all of a sudden she's brought back into the circle. And so it really is about intention. You know, we can joke about how ridiculous these things sound, because they sound ridiculous. But the meaningfulness comes from trying to explore the zone of the uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that the ridiculousness is meant to break the monotony that people otherwise experience day to day. That ridiculousness also is something that I think is like, it's a thing that I was going to ask about to me, which is like, are there spaces online, since this is nominally about the internet, where you still feel like you can find that kind of energy, or does it kind of feel like the internet is not a place to create those kinds of cross-pollinations and connections between scenes and people and things that don't typically intersect?
I feel like there used to be, like a few years ago, there used to be some really great, diverse, enriching spaces that were like they were so bustling and you couldn't keep up with the rate of exchange. Like that was a magical time. and I met people from all over the world, from all over like different sectors of life that weren't necessarily artists, that weren't necessarily musicians or whatever, but they were all unified by this kind of like desire to seek the unknown. Nowadays, I think, as a result of that era, we've found our people and have recessed back into the group chat formula where, you know, it became too exhausting to deal with the outsider voices that didn't align. And so we just said, fuck you, we're gonna go do our thing because we all like each other. And, you know, I think that's kind of where we're moving. Like, that's where we're at. And there's a very, very strong possibility that those group chats will then become bigger than they are now, and then the whole cycle will keep continuing to happen.
I mean, I think about word trust. I just feel like the feeds got inverted to like broadcast mechanisms, and like you just erodes kind of your perception of that, and then you don't feel like a trust in like what the space you are like operating within is. And so it's like, what's my favorite place to exist online probably now is like Xbox Live Chat with my homies in Portland. Like that's like the sacred space probably that's like allows you to connect with friends. That's like one example, but
What's the slur ratio when you guys are playing games?
we joke about our FBI agent, you know, listening. I love that meme, and I hope that it comes to fruition one day because we're all going down together. Yeah, that's a good percentage.
That's all I want to hear. One extension of the question for you that I'm curious about is because of how you're building and because there's, I think, this explosion of people talking about AI and creativity, we're doing it here. Where do you kind of situate yourself in those conversations, in that dialogue? Like, do you care about people on Twitter talking about the latest tool that dropped or like what they made with Claude Design? Do you pay attention to any of that discourse, or do you kind of just laser focus on what you're doing and ignoring everything else?
I mean, internally in our team, it's like pretty fascinating to watch everyone adopt this stuff. Like, my favorite example is our designer on our team. He doesn't use Figma anymore. He just has an app he built himself called Talkboy, and it's you can download, you can get it on GitHub, and it's like this cute little app, and he just talks to his computer now, and we do like live Vercel links, and he just shares them, and we jam on that. And I'll say something to him, and he'll say it as a Talkboy, and it's like whatever. So like we're definitely mainlined in all the like new stuff, and like I think we're just like much less precious about it, right? It's also like you have to like listen, right? You're like, I mean, RIP or this thing is fucking dead is like coming. It's exhausting. It sucks and gross. But yeah, definitely too tapped into Twitter. Yeah, in terms of our position, right, it's like we really focus, right, it's like what is AI's material, not the ends, right? And I think that when you think about like a lot of the tools we're building, you know, have very centered in a lot of the AI stuff, but we're building draw tools, composite tools, stitching tools, right? You name it, right, into the tool sets, and because that's a part of the broader usage of these things, right? And like everyone wants to internalize a better reasoning model inside of whatever that then like can think and look at the picture and do stuff for you or whatever, and it's great, but it's like I think there's still a lot of magic left in all of that. So it's really centered in, which is like, okay, if you ask yourself, what does it mean to be post AI? You start to like insert yourself in a little bit of like more agency in terms of what is your relationship to this stuff, rather than like living again in the moment as it relates to like, what is this thing and why is it whatever. It's like, no, you get through it to then look at it from behind, and I think that's always tough to do because it's just moving fast, but I think I try and think like post AI like pretty much every day right now. See where that takes us from like a product perspective.
What
What's
do
up?
you think post AI is or looks like or contains within it, since it's something that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think partially it's first like a mindset, right? Like just what do you do to like build products that like aren't centered only on like generative AI, right? And I think, like, for example, we got pretty interested in the concept, like, when we started helping artists train the models, right? We were like, okay, like this is the only thing that we need to do. And I was like, realizing it's like kind of a trap, right? Because it was, it felt like kind of very containing. And then, you started listening to people about like how they're thinking about using them in different ways. And it felt like it was just, a fresher take on it that was like less, tech pilled. And so I kind of, the way that I frame a lot of that really is like, what is post AI, right? What is it as material? And I just think it roots you like in a little bit of a better mindset. So it's like, I wouldn't say I have like an answer to what that is necessarily, because we're building it and like working on it. So we're just like trying to think that way, I think, and see where we land,
I think that so much of answering that question is about having interesting conversations, participating in exploring what it even means, because I think that it's very easy to sort of attempt to define it, and so many people online love to define shit that they don't understand. And I think that the thing that I feel when I interact in a lot of these spaces is something that I don't think most people like to admit when they're having this conversation, is that they're scared shitless deep inside. Because they don't actually know what the future looks like for the first time in maybe decades. And what is always impressive to me, while I was super excited to chat with both of you, is that both of you, I would say, operate from a place of courage, which is like, I'm going to do the shit that I want to do, regardless of the fact I don't know what's going to happen. And I think that to me is probably the most important quality that like anyone creative or industrious can have right now is, I don't know what it's going to look like. I have no idea what the macroeconomy situation looks like for the world. I have no idea what like the planet's ability to sustain life is going to look like, so on and so forth. Not to bum everyone out. Nonetheless, I'm going to like go around and like shoot these photos and make this book, but I'm going to like think about what it means to empower artists to like own these models and potentially like monetize on them. That's kind of all that you can do.
I would just add, like, the first question you have to ask is like, where is fear coming from? Like,
Peter Thiel.
is that a Peter Thiel quote? That's fair. Okay.
I think like the fear emanates from his body and infects reality.
I was about to go off on the Antichrist, but I have like a lot of takes on Palantir, which is like fun, but that's not really good. But I think like the fear stuff is important because it's like, where is it coming from, right? And it's like, often you're like, you live in this like algorithmic whatever that's always perpetuating fear, and then you're like, you somehow embody that, right? And you're like, now everyone's scared, right? And I think like that's well warranted, but then it's also like understanding sources, right? And then also ego, right? I think it's like, that's a big part of it. What's your ego? Like, who are you? Like, are you like static or ephemeral or evolving? And like, I think it's our natural tendency to get like, into our routines and all that stuff. And like, I love routines, but I think that's a big part of the whole process of fear. Is like, where it's rooted from. I think a lot of the stuff is ego, which is, it's like, are you a designer? Like, what do you do as a design practice, right? Or are you a coder, right? It's like, like a lot of people thought like maybe at a startup, my job is to like write great clean code or whatever. It's like, no, your job is probably to like ship great experiences that touch people. And it wasn't like making Figma boxes, right? And drop shadows and like, layouts and all that stuff. And so I think like, and people associate ego with like really getting good at that stuff. And that's where all the fear comes from. And I think we have it all in us, by the way, to like move past drop shadows. Yeah.
I think a lot of the fear comes from this concept of AI as a replacement as opposed to AI as an enhancement. And so for people like me, AI represents a second chance or sometimes the first opportunities to actually compete with a lot of people that have traditional capital. And so when you can kind of like level the playing field and do interesting things while also like maintaining your true self, AI then represents an enhancement to what you're already doing, as opposed to just like, I have no fear of AI stealing my job. AI's enabled me to make money for the first time, like in my career. And, I've been in traditional spheres where I've shot bands. They never get paid. Or, you know, you play tons of shows for $100 a night, and that gets exhausting because you're not even making enough to cover the gas money to get to the next city. So it's just like AI kind of represents to me that kind of second chance enhancement to the things that I'm already going to do, whether or not you're going to help me.
Well, the other thing too, I mean, I'm just kind of hearing a pattern going back to blockchains as well, which is like all this stuff kind of inverts like how we thought about stuff. And so, you know, AI, right, like democratizes the ability to not hire a tour manager, right? And it's like, okay, I can now go do that, right? Or
But I would love to be able to hire a tour manager.
sure, and
That was a lot of work. I did like 7 countries by myself for the first time in my life. Like,
You weren't by yourself, you had Claude.
I had Claude, yeah.
your French pal.
But it was fucking wrong like a few times, like with the terminals and stuff. So I ended up like having to run to another terminal like to find a check-in that was then like triggered this whole other process of just stress on my day. And I'll even say like, hey, you were wrong about that. like it gets to the point where it's like, you know, I always wanted Siri to act like Jarvis in Iron Man. And Claude is kind of the Jarvis that I always was like looking for in terms of an assistant.
He just smokes cigarettes and
Yeah.
loves croissants.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say about the inversion part, which is like, you know, the thing about AI, right? It's like you're like, make me an app that does this, and then it makes the thing, and it's like, okay, it does the thing, but it's also shit. And so it's like, right, where it's like before you'd like code, you'd like make the first thing and then add a little bit more, and you'd like kind of see it as it goes. But it's like AI, you kind of start at the end and then move like refine backwards. And then I think about like, you know, trading on chain, which is like, oh, I can make $1 million buying this coin early on, right? And I can make a ton of money, but also I can get all of my money taken away from me, like because I clicked on something wrong, and that's like the opposite of traditional banking, right? And so it's like all of this stuff is like with these new primitives are like wildly inverted in terms of like the thing you would think about finance is like, I'm not going to get my money taken from me, or you know, like code, I can make a beautiful application. It's like actually no, you start in the like radical version and work back with both of these.
I always like that theory that there is a specific key sequence that you can press on your computer to unlock $1 million. Because it's kind of true, especially now with AI.
Will you text me that later?
I wish I knew it. I haven't figured it out. It's not like I can just ask Claude. They don't know. Models, what's wrong with it?
The key combination is being born in such a way that you are able to start an OnlyFans and people will pay. That's like the only surefire way to do it. Everything else is just paling in comparison to that.
Are you talking about feet pics?
Whatever you
Hey,
gotta do.
no
dog,
kink shaming on the
you got it.
panel,
You're giving it away for free right now.
Yeah.
I have one last kind of provocation that I've figured out, which is a lot of what I think we were just talking about is imagining a world where I keep using words that I hate, like we've democratized access to the ability to sit at a computer and try to figure out the right keystrokes that generate joy and happiness and $1 million, etc. I think a lot about what the world of like creative output looks like. You can use music as an example, where I'm not so sure that I didn't like it better when there were massive record labels and then a bunch of indies basically telling me what to like, instead of having to swim through like oceans of garbage to get to things that I care about. And so I'm curious about whether or not you think that that same sort of long tail effect ends up happening in the world of visual art, in the world of filmmaking, so on and so forth. Things that ostensibly AI will make it easier and cheaper to produce any kind of creative artifact. How does that not lead to a world in which everything fucking sucks?
I mean, you're talking about like the return of curation and institution, right? Like curation's a dangerous word because everyone talks about curation and taste and all that shit, but
Very few have it.
yeah, and there we go. Now the conversation begins. But I do think that we are going to have a return to institution more broadly, and that's like both local and online. And I think you're someone that's probably yearning for a little bit more of an institution, right? And it's like, I don't know what that looks like actually, but you know, I think a lot of it too, like church getting eroded, which is weird. And I think it like really matters, which is like groups that set principles and values, right? And it's like, what are they setting about their curation principles and their, you know, their groups? And it's like, you know, again, the popular narrative is like anyone can make anything, everyone can get a million views and all that, but it's like, how do you put this stuff in a pool of consensus is the question. And it's like, how do you get to the 1,000 people that like where it really emanates from? And people, you know, there's so much like vapid nature of like 1 million views on TikTok. Like, what does that actually do for you, right? It's like, I wonder about that a lot, which is like, this is the goal, but it's very ephemeral. And I think like there's something about, you know, getting into the institution aspect that is still really important for everything.
I think people crave authenticity and feelings. Like they want to be moved by the art that they consume, and if you are moved by things that are generated from AI and whatever, your feelings are valid. There's nothing wrong with that. I do, however, think that there will become a saturation point that hits with too much AI being propelled by the wrong type of curation and the wrong type of tastemakers, that then it starts to look like we're being told again what to expect art to be or music to sound like. And as a direct result of that happening, we'll get a renaissance of people just starting garage bands again, or learning how to paint again. Or, you know, in the context of my own work, I made flower pieces to explore AI in early stage, but it made me a florist. Because I then realized, like, I don't actually need to keep practicing this medium. Instead, I'm going to continue with the subject matter, and, you know, maybe I'll try and arrange some flowers. Maybe I'll see what the intersection of flowers and skateboarding could look like. Maybe I'll start taking photos of this stuff. Like that very first photo I put on chain that cost $120 was a glitched photo I made from an app, Boys Noise, designed for a record release. It's where I get the name Error Garden. Error was the name of the app, and the garden represented all of these flowers that I would shoot when I go on tour, because I just needed a subject matter to play with this like toy he built. That changed the course of my whole life, but the subject matter stayed the same. And so I think people will lean more towards the subjects that they appreciate and then consume it however that looks like for them, as long as it's evoking a feeling or a thought or a pattern that they didn't consider before.
This is totally different, but a thought I think about all the time is we're going to run out of attention, right? And like, I'm no expert on the like algorithms that are Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff, but if you think about like how a video gets disseminated, it's like 35 views and then a couple likes or whatever. And it's like, what if you can't hit that threshold because there's so much stuff? And then how much stuff gets lost in the noise? And like that's already the case, right? But like in a world of infinite media, we run out of attention. We don't have a currency to essentially apply to curation like through these systems. And like it would kind of break the ability to like disseminate good stuff, because there is, you know, the systems are pretty good at like sharing stuff you like to you, right? But it's like we're gonna run out of attention to actually do it. So like, what's the like currency or value that we apply to something in a infinite media world where we only have, you know, I don't know, people on Earth like 8 billion?
I mean, it's the
Showing
same.
up in person.
It's the same reason.
Experiencing them together with other people that you love,
Like this.
like this.
I was just gonna say, there's a reason why I still listen to Smashing Pumpkins and the old Radiohead records and Broken Social Scene. It's because it evoked a feeling to me at that time that was undeniable, and I carry that into my adult life. I do seek that feeling again through the new art I consume, but it is becoming harder and harder to find meaning in that work because of the saturation and all the things. But when you do find something that's rad, it's like, you know it. It's undeniable when you see it. And I think it's just, that comes with the age of growing into your own interests.
I think like, I still think about minting as a solution for like finding stuff, which is like, you run out of attention. What if you applied a scarce resource, which is money, to something where you like can signal how much you like that, and like in a world of infinite media, like maybe that's a solution to help get us to like signaling that stuff. But I don't think we're in that reality yet. But we need to find a new way to like figure out finding stuff that we like when we're 32 years old. So.
On that note, I think it's cool if I open it up for some questions, right? Okay, please.
Yeah, it seems like one of the themes that I'm picking up on is that specificity in both of your work has kind of set you both free in your respective fields. Another thing that you mentioned a lot is trust and the loss of that trust with your audience. I'm curious, on a positive note, maybe there's a whole negative undertone to this, but on a positive note, how has that specificity driven that trust with your audience? And what does that conversation look like with your artists? And what does that conversation look like with your art? Specifically meaning like, what in your line of work is something that is very specific? You mentioned that Talk Boy app. Correct me if I'm getting the name wrong.
No, that's right.
That seems like a very specific use case that is no longer needed from this massive Figma entity that he's like, great, I'm just going to use this one corner and kind of specify it to my needs. And Trevor, I know you and I know your work. You are very targeted with the stuff that you do. I'm curious in learning more about how your specificity has driven your trust with your audience.
I think it's just I've been doing like the same thing. It's that thing I always say, it's just be undeniable. If you are so about what you love, people can't deny it. They're gonna gravitate towards it. And it's taken me 40 fucking years to like get to this point where people are starting to understand me. But like, that's nothing in the full spectrum of time, and the fact that there are things like Ethereum that allows me to keep my work on forever. Maybe my audience isn't meant to happen when I'm alive, but isn't it a beautiful thing if it does eventually happen, like 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 200 years from now?
Okay.
But that like drives me to keep wanting to do this stuff.
I don't know if I know any other way to do what I'm doing, and I don't know if I'm specific in what I'm doing. That's kind of a non-answer, but I think, people work with us because we try to understand them and fuck with what they're doing and try and build systems that are suitable and that they can participate within if they want to. I have, 10 different artists that we're talking with right now personally that like, it's not right for them today, and that's fine. And then, what's happened is 8 months go by and they come to us and they're like, hey, I have this project I want to do, and like, let's chat about it, right? And so it's just like about being available, and like consistent is maybe the right word for me. I don't know, saying something the same time, like, over and over and over and over again is probably like, I think about like the Tyler the Creator meme about like, fucking shout out your work. And it's just saying it over and over and over again is like one of the playbooks for sure, to just find your tribe of people that like want to do stuff with you. And I don't know, that's part of the game, and that's what's most rewarding about it. So yeah.
Any other questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, death threats?
I don't have a question, but I think there's a couple things that came to mind with the conversation. So like earlier, there was like talk about sort of the issue with sort of like artists getting cell-shamed. And there was a study done by the Howard Data Group in like 2018, where, and they sort of were instrumental in helping to get artist royalties on chain around that time when it was very new to like development. And they did a 3-part study, I think it's still on the blog or something, and they have YouTube videos where they had talked about kind of like the success rate of an artist versus an artist trader versus just a trader. And in every single scenario, it was if you are a pure trader, even if you suck, you by and large will still outperform the majority of artists. If you're an artist trader, you kind of are in the wash because you may strike out once or twice as an artist, but then you'll end up pouring those gains into trading, but you're not that great at it, so you end up usually losing it. Some cases you might still be good, but you're very, very slim. And then as an artist, unless they think you're the second coming of Basquiat, like it's not happening for you, like whatsoever. And so it had always been interesting, because I remember being a part of the same like early Zora contract where it costs so much more money than anything, like sometimes $300, depending on if it was like a 6-second GIF. And it had always been this issue where I remember back then when you were minting work, the idea of talking about it consistently, you were getting shamed just for saying, hi, I'm an artist and I minted this on chain. And then at some point, I think because of some people, and once, the staged $69 million people art piece blew up, then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, we should be talking about our art. And it almost feels like, or for me, I don't know if you guys would agree with this, but for me, it felt like that explosion to sort of bring this mass onboarding event felt very manufactured to me, because for everyone who was in the trenches at the time trying to get their work off, there was almost no attention being paid to that group. In fact, it was just like kick rocks. Like Super Rare was insanely, they claimed to be highly curatorial, but they really weren't. It was just kind of, if you knew them and you had an Instagram following, you were sort of in there. But if you didn't know them, even if you were a cold artist, you weren't getting plays. So it was a very interesting, weird thing. I just wanted to, I guess, it just reminded me of that. And I'm trying to think of the other thing. Oh, the attention thing. That's the last thing I'm going to shut up. I feel like I think we're like the first large multiple generation that has ever dealt with unbridled attention in this context. And I almost kind of feel like we all have experienced running out of attention. Some people may call it burnout, some people may call it different terms, but we end up just unplugging for a little bit, doing something tangible with our hands. That doesn't have to be touching grass. It could be like, for me, I learned how to make coffee. And once I got through that 8-month process, and then I figured out how to like build furniture and stuff like that, I opened a coffee shop. But now I'm back in doing crypto and AI stuff because my mind mentally was not on it anymore. So I didn't feel so emotionally attached to if things didn't seemingly perform or work the way that I wanted to. And I feel like when at any instance in which your attention feels, your meter is gone, you just naturally sort of retreat and come back to it later. It could take you 5 years, it could be 5 minutes, but I think that the healthy reset is remembering that I don't live in a digital world, I still live in a physical one. I just interact with digital stuff. So you kind of take the ego out of it, and think it becomes healthy again.
I mean, I was just thinking about kind of probably the reality most people live in, which is that everyone's being told everything is new, and everything new requires more brain space, right? You have to grapple with it. Maybe it's not actually new, but it's being told that it's new, and then it's also in this kind of like hyperspeed algorithm and all that type of stuff. And I think like it's almost like my point around kind of like it was more about a curation point than anything. Is like how do we find the stuff that we care about, right? But I think like. And it's like, how many seconds do you have in a day? And I think like the challenge to fight, right, with a lot of this stuff is don't eat up your seconds. It's because like it's not all new. And then the other piece of it is like sit down and dedicate, like really like, create the space, right, to sit down and like, the Pomodoro timerify your brain, right, which is just like, ignore everything else because it's like the only thing we got left. So yeah, I just think it's really important. But yeah, it's really interesting to hear your experience too with kind of the entire crypto art blow up, and also your journey into opening a coffee shop. That's sick.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts from the crowd before we wrap things up? Oh, we got two.
You
go first.
Okay. My question was, does the resource consumption of generative AI or like the environmental impact of it and data centers ever kind of come up in the use of it for you guys' work, or like what is your relationship to that?
My answer to that is the same thing as when people were like talking about crypto using too much energy, in that it's just not my problem to solve. There are other people actively working on that problem that are smarter than me and more specified to tackle those challenges. My responsibility is to use this technology and explore this world in a meaningful way to actually provide the counter argument for its use case, whether that is to keep using it or to not. Because if there aren't good people making interesting things and trying to create social connections with it, we only are going to get warmongering and bad use cases and bad applications to it. And that's basically every technology that's ever been invented. A hammer can be used to kill people, but most of the time it's used to build houses and to make things that are functional and applicable to the human condition and making our lives easier. So I guess that would be my answer to that.
I think the energy and AI thing is kind of like a non-question. I think it gets bundled in with a bunch of stuff like, are you opening a data center and powering your generators with gas? Maybe that's bad, yeah, like that makes sense, but where are you putting them, right? That's like another thing that gets bundled in with that, right? And then two, like, what are the type of labor that you're using in doing that, right? But I think it's in the best interest of a lot of these companies to, make these things really efficient. And I think you could follow, you get a little technical with it, but tokens are getting cheaper and cheaper. But then they also release a frontier model that consumes more tokens, or token prices and energy is going up, right? But it's like the stuff is getting more efficient. So it gets a little weird, where it's like simultaneously wrong and true at the same time. But and then it's also like policy based, right? So it's like, okay, we have a lot of ways to make a lot of energy in the US. We actively avoid building nuclear. Why wouldn't we try and do some of that? And I think the question is about actually making more energy, largely speaking, because it's the more energy we have, the better people's lives get, right? We should make that cheaper, more abundant, and more available to do more stuff with. And I think we have methods to do that. So I don't know, it's not a very fun question for me, but it is and it's really super practical, right? And all the answers I think get jaded based off of policy and environmental stuff. And anyway, so
it's also one of those things. It's like a political and cultural flashpoint, and so even finding reliable information about that subject is difficult, because I've seen as many reports that say that it's destroying the environment as I've also seen studies that show that it's actually driving the growth of solar power in the US, which is okay, who do I trust? I can't go and verify that this specific data center has a ton of solar panels on it, but someone else is telling me that.
Yeah, we also get back to the source of the argument, which is why are we arguing about the energy efficiency of this stuff when you could allocate that money against, for example, arguing for more homes being developed, which would lower the cost of housing prices, which is most of people's rents, right? So there's just what do we want to allocate money to argue for is actually kind of higher level question, which is again an annoying answer, but yeah, it's cultural hot for sure.
You had a question?
Yeah, I think, Trevor, you said at some point that you can't sell out in 2026, but a lot of the undercurrent of the conversation was also creating art for with an end goal of commercialization is kind of artistic sellout. So I'm curious what you meant by that.
I guess in the past, it used to be like a faux pas to license music or to write music for commercials from like a major label band. And what I'm seeing is like that kind of arena has been normalized to where if a band has a song in a commercial, it doesn't mean they necessarily wrote that song for that commercial. They just got paid to have it in the commercial, and so they're actually getting paid for the first time and being able to go on tour maybe. And so I think the intention of the sellout, I think it'd be different if you wrote a song specifically for a commercial as a major band that was successful when you didn't need to. But if you happen to license a song to a commercial and are just getting a fuck ton of money, you're just being rewarded for the work that was already done, and somebody just decided to curate that for that use case. And I guess that was more of like what I meant. The definition of selling out is different than it was in the early 90s.
And on that note, I guess I will first thank you all for putting up with us yapping at you.
Thank you, Jose, for moderating.
I did my best.
We didn't get
I
to
think
the
we got some gems.
we didn't get to the metal stuff, but yeah, I guess
We'll get
that's
to it.
for the
You know,
next,
you're better.
next time.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you, of course, the crew who made this all happen. Let's give everyone a small applause.
Yeah.
Oh, stop. Cool.
Party.
Party, yeah.